Hello everyone, Stepan here. I'll continue the coverage of the US chess champion with a great game played between Wesley So and Zviad Izoria. And of course, Wesley was the favorite, however, Izoria already defeated Caruana a few rounds ago, so he is a very formidable opponent despite being almost 200 points lower rated. And everybody was expecting an exciting game. Of course, Wesley with the white pieces wanted to get an edge out of the opening and of course win the game, because he was tied for the first place before this round. And Wesley opened with knight to f3, the Reti opening, but after d5, d4, e6, c4, and in this position they have entered the Zukertort variation of the queen's pawn game, but this is a very uncommon opening so far, and usually it will transpose into Queen's Gambit declined with knight to f6 and knight to c3, and this is now the 3 knights Queen's Gambit declined. However, after c4, Zviad Izoria played a very uncommon move, and from a position in which there have been 13,000 games played in the database, high-rated games, we come to a position with only about 80 games played after Izoria plays a6, and this is of course, it's a waste of time. It gives white a slightly bigger opening advantage than had Izoria played something normal, like knight to f6. But it's not a bad move. White is only slightly better. Now, from this position on, there has actually been some games with the move c takes d5, and after e takes d5, knight takes c3. This is the most common continuation after a6. But after what Wesley played, which is knight b to d2, we have now come out of the opening theory almost. There was only one game played, or maybe two. So this is almost completely new territory, and I think that Wesley has an edge in unknown positions compared to Izoria, simply because he's a better positional player and he has more experience, of course. So now after knight b to d2, we have knight to f6, g3, preparing to fianchetto his kingside bishop, and the position will now become something in between a Catalan, Queen's Gambit declined, and the Tarrasch after the move c5 by Izoria. So a very uncommon move order, but the position is similar to many things they know, so they were probably both comfortable playing it. Bishop g2, knight to c6, castles, both sides develop normally. Now some tension resolvement in the center, cd4, cd5, queen takes d5, and he could have taken with the knight or with the pawn. It was in fact the best to take with the pawn, even though it's doubling up his central pawns and creating an isolated queen's pawn, but that would have given him a lot of central control, and the knights are actually, and the pawns are actually not that easy to capture. But he took with the queen, which is okay also. Now knight to b3, attacking the d4 pawn 3 times. And now the position gets interesting. Of course, you can see in this position that Wesley is threatening a lot of stuff with his bishop, and this bishop is dangerous on the h1 a8 diagonal. The queen is lined up with the bishop, so there can always be some tactical problems. However, black either has to defend the pawn, let it go, or develop. So if he played bishop to d7, which would have been an okay move, then after knight f takes d4, taking the pawn, regaining the pawn and opening up the bishop on the queen. After a move such as queen to h5, black would be perfectly fine. White has a slight edge, but nothing major. But after knight to b3, Izoria played the best move in the position. He played d3. And this is now liquidating the pawn in a very favorable way for him. More favorable than had he tried to develop, because Wesley has a tough decision to make. From this position on, there are a couple possible moves. First of all, if knight f to d4, attacking the queen seemingly, then black is much better, perhaps even positionally winning, because after d takes e2, now the white's queen is attacked as well, and white has no time to capture on d5. So the game would continue with queen takes e2, knight takes d4, and in this position, of course, black is also a piece up, but white is able to regain it with queen to d1. Of course, black has no time to defend the knight with e5 because the queen is loose. So queen to d7, knight takes d4, knight takes d4. And this position is equal, and that's of course not what Wesley wanted. So knight f to d4 wouldn't really work after d3. So this position would lead to equality, or even a slightly better position for black. After d3 there was another option, that was of course e takes d3, but after queen to h5, just getting away from the stare of the bishop, Bishop to e3, white would have a slight positional edge. He would have this material equality, but an isolated queen pawn and not that much to play for, at least not for a win. So in this position, Wesley played a much worse move than both of these, leading to a slightly worse position, but a move which is so hard to calculate that it must have confused Izoria very much. He played e4. And this is now gaining a tempo on the queen. Of course, the queen has to move. Let's just try out a few moves. First of all, if after e4 something normal is played, like let's say knight takes e4, then white is much better after a move such as knight to g5, and this is of course pinning the knight to the queen, attacking it twice, both with the bishop and with the knight, and the knight is defended by the bishop, so there would be a lot of trouble for black, and defending with a move such as f5 would be very weakening for the black king. So this doesn't work. After e4, then of course you have to move your queen, so moving it to b5 is okay, to h5 is okay, even d6, and all of those moves are fine. He played queen to b5, just getting away from the stare of the bishop and from the pawn. And now you can see that black still has this extra pawn, and the position is very complicated. And now Wesley continues with knight b to d4, initiating one trade, attacking both the knight and the queen. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and now queen to d7 is played because the queen had to move away from the stare of the knight. Now bishop to e3, defending the knight. Taking the pawn in this position would be actually losing because of e5, so he can't take the pawn. So bishop to e3, bishop to c5, provoking a lot of weaknesses, and this move is now very risky because it gave Wesley an opportunity to get a winning position, and this is the critical position of the game here on move 13. And now Wesley has only one option actually. This is the position which could have won the game. He had a winning sacrifice, which wasn't clearly winning, and in the best lines for black could have survived, but that would only be possible if an engine was playing, and I think the sacrifice, if he had found it, he would have won the game surely, because he's much stronger tactically than Izoria, and Izoria would have spent so much time that he would have gotten inside knot in about 2 moves. And of course, you have to check out the weaknesses in the position. Of course, the e6 pawn is weak. The g7 pawn is weak. The c5 bishop is loose. If you combine those 3 factors, then knight takes e6 has to be considered. And I'm sure Wesley was considering that, and I will show you the line which I think discouraged him from playing that. Let's take the pawn. Let's see what would have happened. Now, knight takes e6. In this position, of course, if black should capture the knight either with the queen or with the pawn, then the bishop is loose, white is simply regaining his pawn, and he will take the d6 pawn sooner or later. So this would have been virtually a pawn up for white and a completely winning position. So the only move for black is bishop takes e3. After bishop takes e3, white of course plays knight takes g7, king to f8, and now white has several options. First of all, he can take the bishop with f takes e3, which is not as good because simply king takes knight and white will be material down. And he can also play a normal move such as knight to f5, but that doesn't work either because knight takes e4. And in this position, he played the only move that actually holds the advantage in the position despite the virtual piece sacrifice. He played e5. And this is now attacking black's knight in return. So if king takes g7, then pawn takes f6, and the bishop is still loose. Now let's go over 3 options black has. The most obvious one, taking the pawn with the bishop and then grabbing the knight, doesn't work, because after bishop f2, rook takes f2, you can see that this position would be losing for black. And of course, white is just equal on material, but his position is so superior. The king safety, the pawn structure, the loose d3 pawn is just winning for white. So this doesn't work. Taking on f2 with the bishop is a bad move. After e5, the second move you might consider is king takes g7, and after e takes f6 check, king takes f6. This doesn't work either because of f takes e3 with check, and once again equal material, winning for white. If after e takes f6 the king doesn't take the pawn, then simply f takes e. and the pawn up even. So after e5, there would be only one move for black in this position, and that's bishop to g5. And I think this move is really hard to find, and if Izoria would have found it, then he would have spent a lot of time finding it, I'm sure of that. And I think Wesley got this far, and then got excited, and then started calculating further, because he can calculate 20 moves in advance, and then got discouraged. Now let's look at White's options. Of course, he has only one, and the move is e takes f6. He has to take the knight. Now Black has only one move once again. If he takes the pawn with the bishop, then knight to h5 is winning, and this is now once again equal material, but structurally and considering king safety, White is winning. This is just busted for Black. There's nothing for him in this position. After e takes f6, the only move to save Black's position is the unbelievable queen to d4, and I'm not sure if Black would have found this. Maybe he would have. He is a strong grandmaster, but the move is very unlikely to be played in such a volatile position, in which you have to spend a lot of time on each move and calculate. Now the winning variation for Wesley would have been h4, gaining a tempo on the bishop, bishop f6, knight takes h5, and this might seem losing for White, but after bishop to g4, simply queen to d2. You can even play, in this position, you can play bishop to f3, but queen to d2 is better. And because if bishop h5, then queen to h6 check, king to g8, and simply regaining the material. And now once again you can see that the material is equal, but king safety and pawn structure is better for White. And this is the best option for Black. This is the best that Izoria could have gotten if Wesley sacrificed with knight takes e6. And now of course d2 is a threat, so d2, bishop to d5, and now we have to react, and your f7 pawn is loose. The only way to defend is rook to f8, and now after rook f to d1, Black doesn't really have anything. White has a nagging edge in the position. He will inevitably win the d2 pawn, because the f8 rook can't move. And after a move such as bishop to b3 or something else, just queen to e2 and rounding up the pawn. So I think Wesley would have won this position, and it's questionable whether Zviad Izoria would have found all the correct moves. So after bishop to c5, knight takes c6, you could say was winning. I believe that Wesley would have won comfortably. After bishop e3, knight to g7 check, king to f8, e5, and now let's get to the best moves. Bishop to g5, let's say Izoria would have found it, e takes f6, queen to d4, h4, bishop takes f6, knight to h5, bishop g4, queen d2, and you can see that White has an edge. However, after bishop to c5, Wesley calculated for about half an hour, and I was watching the live commentary of the game, and everybody was just, yeah, I'm 90% sure that Wesley will find the move. I was 100% sure, because what do you play if you don't play that? I mean, what are your other options? I just couldn't see another move, and when I was considering every other option, I just didn't think White stood a chance, even for equality, let alone for a better position. So I think I would have taken on e6. Of course, I couldn't have calculated all the lines, and perhaps I would have lost and missed something, but I think my move would have been knight takes c6 for sure, every time. However, after half an hour, Wesley played knight to f5. And now Black has equalized, in fact more than equalized. Of course, it's not a piece sacrifice because the bishop is hanging, and if bishop takes bishop, then simply knight takes bishop. However, after e takes f5, bishop takes c5, knight takes c4, the position is completely equal and Wesley stands no chance to win. And of course, now there's this tactical sequence, the bishop isn't loose, and of course he can play rook to e1, queen to d5 attacking the bishop, now queen to a4 check, b5, and now the tactic which Wesley found and which he calculated. Unfortunately it's a drawing tactic. Bishop e4, f e4, queen takes e4 check, queen takes e4, rook takes e4, and now they entered an opposite colored bishop position in which the rooks will simply get traded. White is going to win d3, and they're going to agree to a draw, and that was inevitable. So bishop e6, trying to activate, rook d4, taking the pawn, rook to d8, now bishop to d6. This was a nice move by Wesley, because he is always able to return the rook to d2 and then defend it with bishop to b4. So now f6, rook takes d3, king to f7, rook to d2, preparing to defend the rook with bishop b4, rook d7, trying to double. Of course, if Black manages to double, then his position is winning, but after bishop b4, he has to exchange. Rook d2, bishop d2, rook to d8, now bishop to c3. Black has no infiltration points, and now bishop to g4, preparing to exchange the rooks, and Izoria was of course content with the draw. Rook e1, rook to d1, takes, f4, king to e6, and here they agreed to a draw, of course. This is a theoretical draw, and one would have to lose on purpose, and this is just a drawn position, which is very unfortunate because Wesley played a very aggressive game. He played a great game from a human perspective, and of course some of his moves were slightly imprecise engine-wise, but that doesn't really matter. And after e4 he created a lot of trouble for Izoria, and I'm very unhappy that he didn't find knight to e6, and perhaps he saw that after d2 the pawn would be too hard to stop. But and of course you have to not take it too much on him, because it was a hard variation to calculate, and there were several options for black. But I think if he played knight takes e6, Izoria would have resigned in about 5 moves. But anyway, I hope he gets some rest today. It's rest day at the US Chess Championship, and that he can crush somebody tomorrow. Okay, everybody, thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked this tactical game by Wesley So. Unfortunately, he failed to convert it. And stay tuned for more chess. Thanks very much. Bye.